So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Hayley Lever, who's the CEO of GM Moving, and she wouldn't describe herself like this, but I think we'd all agree a real leading thinker and convener around whole systems approaches, not just in Greater Manchester, but beyond, and now helping to organise a global community of practice around physical activity systems change. So lots of exciting things happening. And so Hayley, over to you really, just to introduce things and get us started. Is that all right?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's really great to see all the names in the chat. I'm glad I did that. It's nice to know who's in the room. Looking forward to this session. And I love actually just, when you've got something on the horizon that you're going to be doing, and it makes you go back and think about it differently. And I've gone back and read some of the blogs that I'd written actually back in 2018-19, just to get my head really into this space of movement building. Very much looking forward to the conversation and hearing, and what kind of questions are coming through it as well. So thanks to Ken and the team for inviting me. We're going to kind of explore, right, what does movement building mean to me and our work, and what have we learned, and some examples along the way around movement building. And I'm sure there'll be loads of examples that will come to mind for you all as well in the process. So I'm going to start off just by sharing a couple of videos, a bit of a provocation as well, I suppose, to get our heads into the topic. Some of these you'll have seen, but a couple of them you've probably seen before. But we're going to watch these two really short videos, and then we're going to go straight into breakout rooms and really think about what resonates, what comes to mind, what do they bring to mind for us, and then we'll come back and kind of then get into a bit of more of a presentation and discussion around some slides and some visuals that have helped me to understand movement building. Also to understand my role in it, and we will talk quite a lot about kind of leadership practice, mindsets and behaviours and ways of working, as well as, so what does that mean for me as a leader, and how do I play my part in growing a movement as well. So I'm just going to share a slide and then a couple of short videos before we get into some conversations to get started. So what really early on in my time in GM Moving, I joined GM Moving in 2017. And I started writing blogs, literally sort of at that moment where I joined Greater Manchester. I started the blog site. And one of the first blogs I wrote was about how you grow social movement. And I've written it through the lens of the community where I live, and how we were growing a movement around, activity and good, healthy lives in this community. And looking at it through that lens, really, and what are the conditions you need to create to make that happen at a community level. And I must have shared it on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. And Chris Dabbs, who's from Unlimited Potential, which is a sort of innovation space, really challenged me to say, oh, well, it's not possible, or is it possible? He challenged me a question: is it possible to start a movement from the top down, which he was perceiving, the GM system's aspiration to grow a movement for movement from within the formal part of the system. And his observation was that actually social movements start by people kicking against something. So coming from a more activist space and some of the biggest and sort of most lasting social movements have come from people kicking against injustice and issues. And so I'm going to start with this question, really, because what is it we're really kicking against? Because that made me think about, well, what is the thing what is the problem in society that a movement for movement is addressing? And these days, I'm going to talk about that. It's about inactivity and inequalities. But back in 2017, I was quite challenged by his observation of what is it you're kicking against, and is it even possible to grow a movement from the formal part of the system? So that's just something to think about, and we'll perhaps come back to that later in the ways in which that has happened over time, and to what extent that's happening in other spaces as well. And then I'm just going to show this, and you might have seen this video before about the dancing guy on the hill. I would ask you to sort of just watch it fresh if you have seen it before. It's been really sort of quite instrumental to my thinking and work. And if you just listen and pay real attention to the narrative that goes along with the visuals, I think it's some stuff that we can then explore in the breakout rooms. I'm just going to hopefully play a video, and then I'm going to play a video of GM Moving as a movement and see how these things connect. Beth and I did check this earlier, and of course it worked first time. No, here we go.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
Oh, I wish that was a better quality video. It makes your eyes go a bit boggled. The way the fact that it's not is kind of demonstrates what it's about. So we'll come back to that later. I think just hold that in mind, the narrative that that he was talking through there, and start to think about maybe in your work or maybe in your wider life or things that you're involved with outside of work. Where have you seen that sort of process of movement building take place, and then you'll be able to share that in some breakout rooms in a second. This short video, it's only 2 minutes video. It's really trying to convey GM. We developed it around the GM Moving strategy launch in 2021 to try and capture where we were at that moment in time as seeing GM Moving as a movement for movement, and helping to bring a strategy to life in a way that was inviting people to join in. And it stands the test of time really well, apart from one word in there that I'd change if I could, but it wouldn't rhyme then, because Eve wrote a brilliant poem alongside this video, and we might need to do version 2 shortly. But so enjoy this, and this is really about telling you what GM Moving is and why we're doing what we're doing here.
GM Moving is our shared movement for movement, our collective call to enable active lives for all, so we can all move more together, whatever the weather, so we can all move our way, whatever the day. Designing moving in to our places and spaces and increasing the smiles and the sweat on our faces. Putting the joy back in the journey, encouraging play on the way. Making sports more inclusive, removing the barriers, making our facilities fit for purpose for all abilities. Ensuring nothing is done about us without us, and helping each other to move more each day. Throw a stick for the dog, try a slow jog, take a walk as you talk. Fly a kite, take a hike, ride a bike, scooter or trike. cleaning, gardening, DIY, or find something new and give it a try. Together we can find a way to design moving into everyone's day. So get involved, join in. Share your stories on WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram or Twitter. What's brought you joy? What's made you fitter? A photo, a post, at home, in the park, provides inspiration, creates a ripple and a spark. Write moving into your policy. Put it on the agenda. It's your business too, whatever you do. Moving helps us to take notice, to give and to learn. Happier, healthier and more connected. Moving brings more benefits than we ever expected. Wherever you live, work and play, there's a way to move a little more every day. We are all GM movers, movers and shakers. It's who we are and it's what we do.
There you go. So I've just noticed Chris Dabbs, who I mentioned earlier, is in that video, giving out an award at the Sports Awards. So which is really lovely to see, actually, the guy who suggested that, was asking that question about how you grow a social movement from the formal part of the system. And he's very much a part of the movement in lots of different ways in the work. So so I'm going to pause there. I'll pass back to you, Ken, to set up the conversations for the breakout rooms, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. That's a really lovely start, and I don't think I'm not sure I've seen the GM Movers video before. Really lovely. So we're gonna spend 10 minutes now. Well, we're gonna go till 10:30. So by the time I finish introducing it, 11 minutes, and we'll come back at 10:30. What we want you to think about is, I suppose, first of all, to introduce yourself to other people in the room and just share why you're here. So what was it that brought you to today's session? Do that bit first, so everyone gets a chance to just say hello, and then just share some thoughts, as Hayley directed there, around those two videos, like what resonated, what stood out, what have you been thinking about, just in terms of that initial spark that those two videos might have created for you in your thoughts. I'm really conscious that 10 minutes is not a long time, so just be cautious and thoughtful about creating space for everyone to be able to share their views, and don't be afraid to politely interrupt somebody if their enthusiasm is just carrying them on for 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. Don't be afraid to just give each other a nudge, and we all want to respect that time and give people a chance to share. So Beth is going to hit go imminently, and you'll go into a breakout room. Myself and Hayley will join in as well, and then when we get back, just going to have a couple of minutes where you'll be able to share some what was the big thing for you in the chat. So be thinking about that, what you might share back in one sentence or so in the chat box later. So Beth, over to you if you can hit go. So quick introductions, why you're here, and then what's resonated with you from those early videos that Hayley shared. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Oh, and it's nice to see a few more faces. It's really helpful when you're doing these webinars to be able to gauge people's reactions, even just through facial expressions and some non-verbal cues. We'd invite you now just to share, what was the highlight of that discussion for you? Any interesting thoughts? Claire Tompkins, I'm going to come to you for a second, just for a minute or so review. I mean, we just while you're popping into the chat, if you would, everybody, some of your thoughts, that'd be really helpful. We were chatting in our little room about courage and almost needing some bravery. When you think about that video, the bravery to join in and to start off, but that courage to sort of challenge some of those initial perceptions, or some of the things that might get in the way, some of the barriers. And we had a little chat about local politics, and on the one hand agreeing with a more systemic sort of whole place strategy, but then some of the decisions being heavily influenced by financial pressures that were kind of not connected with the movement that we were trying to build. A couple of us, perhaps if everyone could just pop themselves on mute, that would be helpful. So yeah, that was what we were talking about. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing in the chat. Claire, could I come to you? What was the conversation like in your room?
Yeah, absolutely. A really good conversation. I think definitely the video with the lone nut dancing guy on a hill really resonated with people. And we had a good chat about that thing of if we're all running around trying to be leaders and leading our own things in different directions, it'd be chaos. We kind of need to make sure we're creating those conditions and those easy asks so people can follow us and join in and connect those different visions and strategies as well. So we talked a little bit about that. I think Hayley's comments about Chris's challenge back around how you build a movement and does it start in the system and does it start in communities really resonated as well, and how you really engage in communities in a meaningful way so communities can lead the change that they want to see as well. And also just we touched a bit on kind of the challenges of recruitment and having the workforce with the skills and capabilities needed to do this kind of work and do this role in a place, and a bit of the challenges between like operational doing and strategic thinking and having the vision, and how you get the right blend of those within your teams as well.
Great, thank you. Some really interesting thoughts. So we'd encourage you to keep sharing the things that stood out to you in your chat. We've not got time to go around everybody, of course, in terms of verbal feedback, but I'm gonna hand back to Hayley now, who's going to share some of their learning and some of her thinking in terms of the work she's been involved with so far. So Hayley, over to you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And yeah, do keep putting little bits in the chat about the conversations you're having, because Pen and Beth and I and Claire can sort of link back to it later. I'm going to just talk us through a few slides. It's really hard to, out of all of the stuff sort of we've learned over the years and different kind of visual ways of helping me to articulate it, it's hard to know where to start with this. So hopefully the video kind of helped you to understand a little bit, because I'm recognizing not everyone's heard of GM moving, not everyone's necessarily knows what GM moving is or what it does, and I haven't really got time to kind of go into explaining the history and the journey of GM moving to locate you in that. We can share some stuff in the chat. Claire can share some links to the GM Moving website, links to the strategy, things like that. So if you're holding some questions about GM Moving itself, please ask them and we'll try and point you to some sort of more concrete information. But I'm going to try and focus here just on like the whole process of change, I guess, and how you create the conditions for change in a movement building kind of way. So I'll probably talk for 10 or 15 minutes here, and hopefully that will give you a little bit more insight and perhaps provoke some more questions as well. I'm going to talk through a few slides. So I think one of the things that's been really helpful for us, and these kind of key messages and this narrative has evolved. So we didn't have all this narrative back in 2015 when the first blueprint for change was written around GM moving. We pay a lot of attention to the kind of language of how we describe what this is and how to, I think the key thing about this slide is about it's recognizing that movement matters to all of us. It has been designed out of life. So we have got that inactivity and inequality sort of crisis, but that together we can design it back in and that we all have a part to play. So that's trying to speak to that point from the leadership video, really about everyone's got a role to play. There's many, many, many roles that we all play. I play multiple roles. I play a role in my community, I play a role in our organisation, I play a role in our system, I play a role nationally. So there isn't one, and sometimes I'm a leader and sometimes I'm a follower, but we've all got many, many roles that we can play in this, in our families and our communities. So I think that's really important, and paying attention to the language of it is key, so that it does feel invitational and everyone can describe their role and contribution to it. Just move that on. We were chatting in our breakout room just then about alignment, really, about like with people in this group who might work in leisure or in sports development, or they might work in health or public health or NHS or community. The point is are we all sort of working towards the same overall mission? And in this context, the mission is active lives for all. So it's tackling inactivity and inequalities. And though we all might have multiple roles and multiple agendas that we're delivering on, the thing that binds us in this work is around addressing inactivity and inequalities. And so the question is, are we increasingly pointing towards that sort of North Star, or that sort of bullseye point? Is part of the journey, I would say, from building a movement is helping people to point in a direction, to focus on something that matters and to play their role in it. So that might be something you take away from this, is how do I, in my organisation or in my place, help people to see what that kind of bullseye is and help people to, increasingly point towards it. For us in Greater Manchester, this is about every neighbourhood. So how do you create the conditions for active lives for all in every neighbourhood across the whole of our city region? So in the 10 localities, and the question is like, is everything we're doing helping to create the conditions for it to be more and more likely that somebody in a neighbourhood in Greater Manchester can live an active, healthy, happy life? And then how do we then at scale do that across the whole country? And what's the role of, you know, getting everybody in the country pointing in that direction? Both in terms of the what we're doing, but also how we're doing it. How do we make it invitational? How do we help people to see that we're all on the same journey here? So recognising that there's work that needs to happen at a neighbourhood level that's different. So what happens in one neighbourhood might be different to another. What happens in one district, and there's great to see some of our Greater Manchester district colleagues on here, locality colleagues. You know, what happens in Oldham might be different to what happens in Wigan, but actually we've got a collective mission that we're all on for Greater Manchester. So how do you get people working in a really connected way with strong relationships and trust and collaboration to point things in a direction that makes it more and more likely that that the neighbourhoods in Wigan or Oldham have got the conditions for good lives for all and active lives for all in their place. So collaboration is really key. I think the leadership guide video speaks to that really well. It's like everyone's playing their role. They're all dancing slightly differently, but they're all joining in and making a contribution. And increasingly, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say, it feels more and more collaborative across the country. It feels more and more collaborative in the global community of practice that Ken mentioned at the beginning, that we're kind of learning from each other, not competing with each other, and collaborating, which is so important to making a difference. And it can be about, we talked a little bit in our breakout room about capacity and resource. You know, how do you align the capacity, the resource, when you've got organisations to run? You know, you have a bottom line to think about. How do you make sure that you are working towards the mission and that the financial decisions that you're making is in service of that mission, which can sometimes feel quite difficult, but that's the aim really, is how do you make sure that every decision, every investment, every role that is created is pointing towards that mission and getting that ever sort of increased alignment. And then how do you create the conditions for that people power? Because the biggest resource in the system is the people and the communities and the energy that they can bring to make the conditions in their own communities. So, you know, what happens in the community here where I live, literally every single day, and I'm not always in it because I'm at work. There's so much going on in our community and the conditions here that kind of the system, the formal part of the system around us can sometimes feel a little bit what's the word? Not superfluous, but it's important. But the people in my community and the volunteers I work with here don't really even know about the people who work for the council, or the people who work for the active partnership, or the people who work for the national partners in this, because they're just getting on and doing it. Unbeknownst to them, the conditions are being created for that. So it's how you get that all working and that flow really from communities up to the kind of formal part of the system. And that's just another way of articulating that really. How do you get sort of investment and people and resource pointing in a more aligned way? So one of the things that's been really important and helpful for us is to be able to, for people, so people say in my team, in our organisation, to understand their contribution to our business plan, which is the blue document here, as an organisation and active partnership, being able to describe our contribution as an organisation to the purple strategy, which is the whole system strategy for GM Moving in Greater Manchester, and for the Greater Manchester strategy to describe its contribution to uniting the movement. And that the arrows go both ways here, because there's like a feedback loop here. So the uniting the movement strategy creates better conditions for Greater Manchester to do its work and for me to do my work. And that you should be able to sort of replace the blue strategy there, which is our organisational one, with Stockport moving together, with Transport for Greater Manchester and the B network. And that's the thing about alignment, is if you can get that everybody's contributions pointing in a direction, that's really powerful. And you can't control all of that, but you know, you can try and nudge and invite people to join in with that. Big part of this for us has been about recognising that we need to change culture. So Ken and I will come on to this in a conversation about mindsets, about assumptions, about beliefs, about worldviews, and that actually if you can change worldviews, which is a kind of really intangible thing, it can shift a worldview. You can shift a whole load of other stuff that is really tangible. And shifting worldview doesn't necessarily cost any money, it doesn't necessarily take loads of capacity. sometimes it takes a courageous conversation. And I think in movement building, and active souls would be a good example of this, is where, when we get onto some examples, there's like where somebody speaks up about something and is courageous enough to challenge the status quo and the dominant worldview, that can unlock a whole load of change that doesn't even cost a penny. So we'll come back to that, Ken. We'll make sure we come back to that point in a bit. I'm just gonna, this came up in our room as well, so I will just share this this video, and I didn't do the share sound thing when I pulled the slides up, so I'll do it again, just make sure that we get the sound of this, because this was relevant to something that came up in our breakout discussion. So we'll play it. And again, it's just a couple of seconds. This is a, trying to think when we did this, probably 2019. There was a lot of conversations around the time about how do you, the language, I suppose, of complexity and working with complex systems, and people really struggling to get their head around what it meant. And so we made this animation to try and bring it to life in a more visual way, in a more inclusive and accessible way, for people to understand the difference between perhaps the ways that we had been working, certainly the ways I've been working in my career to date, working through sort of singular interventions and programs and delivery of stuff, to something that's more complex, more nuanced, a bit crazy, but does create better conditions for a movement to grow. But to recognise that the language of complex systems and systems theory was kind of quite impenetrable for a lot of people. So hopefully this just helps to address that a little bit.
Greater Manchester Moving is a social movement designed to help people move more and enjoy a healthier and longer life as a result. If this was a simple problem, it would look like this. In reality, this isn't a simple problem. It's a complex problem. Real lives are unpredictable and influenced by hundreds of different factors. We may feel we have personal choice, but it is very much defined by the world around us. We are tied into a system of influences that expands throughout our friends, family, our workplace, any community groups we are part of, local government, national government, and even our culture. In a complex system, if one thing changes, everything else changes in response. For example, government policy directly affects us all, but it also shifts when enough of us want it to. Constant change means that something that worked well in Didsbury last year might not work in Glodwick, or even again in Didsbury, today. To transform a system this big, unpredictable, and messy, where do we even start? This is what we ask ourselves every day at GM Moving. And our answer is everywhere. For a solution to work locally, we need a deep understanding of that area's unique strengths and what can be done. Right here, right now, to get people moving. Decisions need to be made within the community that let local people take the lead on making active lives easier. But those in charge of large institutions also need to be on board, because for local change to happen, it must be supported by high-level strategic decisions. What we do is hard to measure. Rather than how small parts of the system are causing people to change, we want to know how the system is changing as a whole. Every day, Greater Manchester Moving advocates are working with town planners, large employers, and small community groups. Our role is to spark meaningful conversations in lots of places at once, to gently and slowly influence and recruit people at every level to use their own creativity and initiative to transform things for the better. To follow what works, wherever it leads. To share the excitement when something goes right, as well as support people to learn and try again when things go wrong. It will take patience and it will take time. But we believe that by doing things differently and accepting complexity, we can create changes that get real people moving in the real world. We believe in the power of Greater Manchester's people to make positive system change happen. That together we can design moving back into life. If you believe it too and you want to be part of it, visit www.gmmoving.co.uk today.
Hopefully that sort of again just brings to life how we try and articulate that, and actually being able to being able to describe what this is and how it works helps also people to play their part in it. Whoops.
In reality, this isn't a simple.
Apologies. I'm just going to pause and breathe for a second there, Ken, because as I move into a few more slides that are more about the how and some of the models and ways of thinking about our leadership in this. But I just want to pause there, Ken, and just give you a chance to come in and bridge off anything I've said so far. That's right.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Really interesting, and looking forward to, as you say, moving into some of that sort of what does that mean for us as individuals and as leaders. I mean, one of the things that we've been finding, and I've been learning in Lancashire, but then working with other places as well across the country, is I think I see this in some of the GM work as well, is if we've got this big idea of uniting the movement and physical activity being the movement we're gonna, we're working to build together this energy. What it really is, both in Lancashire and Greater Manchester and other places, it's movements within movements as well. So I think one of the challenges that we all collectively face is when we look at the whole thing, as you've described in that video there, the whole system approach, and trying to really move physical activity along in all areas, in all places, in all communities, and across all different parts of the system. If we're trying to do that all in one go, all of, in one big bite-sized chunk, if you like, really difficult to generate energy across all of that at the same time. But there's been when I think about the work in Pennine, well, we've got a movement around the outdoor town in Burnley that's gathering momentum, and this idea of an outdoor town is building in different ways, that's in Burnley. But we've got a movement around strength-based leadership, and a movement around creative engagement, and how we can how we can help people generate new ideas. And so there's different themes that are gathering momentum that are almost like threads in the tapestry of the bigger sense of whole, that societal, cultural norms and ideologies change, that's going to be ultimately the thing that flips right from one to the other. And that for me is interesting, but almost a bit liberating, that I don't have to come up with some catchy message that is going to change everything. I can do lots of little things and some will build momentum and some won't, and that's all fine, because you can't really predict what gathers momentum. I don't think they didn't know that one guy's dance would gather momentum. There might have been someone else dancing right on the other side of the field that didn't gain any momentum and nobody joined in. Neither dancer was better or worse or more valuable or important. Some of it's just luck. And when you think about online, stuff going viral online, or which viruses catch on in the health setting, like, it's one of the challenges with movements is it's really unpredictable. And so, coming back to some of the comments in the chat, there's a bravery of just starting and acknowledging that it might not catch on, or that it might, and either's fine. And I suspect that was a bit, like you mentioned with Active Souls, and I don't know whether we'll come back to that, but never anticipated that they'd be doing really great Active Souls work in Cardiff or in France or wherever else it might be catching on, and some of which you'll know about and some of which you won't. And so for me, there's something in that when we think about movement building, of not being too over planning and not being too over precious, and accepting that there's no way to predict what will catch on. But if we try lots of things, then I think there's something about, I don't know the answer to this, how do you notice which ones are gathering momentum, and then sort of align your energy and resources with those things that are momentum builders. So those were some of my just early thoughts from what you've been sharing.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in that. I think if I just took the example of Active Souls, and for anyone who's not heard of Active Souls before, I did post a link to a TEDx talk that I did in Oldham, which was connected to that, and I'll share another one in a second, which is the learning. So I used that video of the leadership guy to help, probably about a year or two on from the beginning, the first conversation around the shoes we wear to work, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, where it came from in a second. But using that a couple of years into the sort of journey, use that video and the narrative of the video to try and just understand what was going on with the Active Souls thing. And actually, when you unpick line by line what he's saying in that video, it was a really helpful way to observe what was changing in the system and what was changing as a result. So just very briefly, what had happened with Active Souls is that Rachel Allen, who was a program manager in the what is now the ICP, who I was working with on GM Move in the very beginning, we were basically having a moan in the office about the fact that she felt she needed to change out of her trainers when she got into the office to put smart shoes on or high heels, whatever. Because that was what was the dominant worldview. She wouldn't have described it in this way at the time. The dominant worldview in the workplace at that time in 2017-18 was formal, formal clothing and formal footwear. And that sense, but actually when you're coming on the train, you want to run across town, you're in your trainers, and then you get changed your trainers for the rest of your real working day, and in which in some way you were going to behave differently because you have different shoes on your feet. And Rachel had done a master's, I think it was, on the concept of enclosed cognition. So what you wear affects how you think, feel, and behave. And she was sort of translating that in that moment in the conversation with me to, I'm really frustrated. I feel like I've got to get changed out of my trainers. And actually, if I was wearing trainers around my working day, I'd be more likely to be more active, because I might then go for a walk at lunchtime, or I might go for a walk in meeting, or it would create the conditions in which for me to be more active every day. And so I was like, well, write about it, So she wrote this blog, and then somebody in the health team took that blog into a conversation they were having with Andy Burnham about GM moving and about the work. And Andy read the blog and was like, well, come on then, let's make that a thing. Let's change the rules. So you've gone from that sort of challenging a worldview to being brave enough to speak up, to then putting that down on paper, and then somebody, and this was the first follow-up bit, somebody going, I'm going to take that, I'm going to put it on Andy's table and have a conversation with him about it. And then Andy being prepared to be a follower, and he's seen as the most senior leader, and someone in the room earlier was talking about the most senior leaders who've got the power to make change happen. And there is something in that, where you've got a leader who's open and curious and is prepared to follow. They can then play their role in a movement building because they have got a voice and agency and influence that other people are going to listen to. And so this whole kind of sequence of events then sort of rippled out. And you can then chart that whole journey, I guess, from that through that one story of how you create the conditions for that to grow, to the point now where it's sort of all over the place. And Manon, we're in the room. I mean, what's really funny in Wales is that they turned it into a more formal thing and are taking it into rooms and kind of working through the formal part of the system through, for example, meetings around the public health system. And so for us, it was a very sort of informal, socially networked, under the radar in many ways, ripple effect. But then I remember Andrew, who's a strategic lead for us in our marketing communications team, when he came to join the organisation, he could see this conversation all over the place around Active Souls, but he was kind of saying, well, where is it? Or where is it in the strategy? Well, I was like, oh, it's not in the strategy. It was just a conversation. It's never been a formal part of the work. And so actually we're now in a bit of a process of perhaps formalising it a little bit more and designing it in to some more of the organised part of the work. So, and then I was interviewed about it a couple of weeks ago for an article that a journalist was writing about it, and they were asking whether we'd ever sort of evaluated it and worked out the return on investment for it. And of course it's impossible because it's grown arms and legs all over the place. And like it shows up in all sorts of places that we're not even sure whether it's showing up over there because of what we did or not, or because of that conversation Rachel had. You kind of suspect it is, and you could sometimes you can trace a line through to it, and you can work out what the connections are between us and that place, or us and that thing. But it's impossible to measure and evaluate a social movement in the traditional old ways of thinking. And so there's some challenge in that, but also I think there's a leadership challenge for us in just letting go of control and an ego and sort of observing and enjoying seeing it grow, but not needing to prove or demonstrate that it was anything to do with us. And so the most recent manifestation of that was around the ASICS desk break advert. And there are some connections that I'm aware of behind the scene from the work we've done to that. But I don't care, and I don't know to what extent Active Souls has influenced that advert. It doesn't matter to me, but some people are really keen to know. But that's part of the thing, is you just need to set it free and then just watch it ripple. So I'll just pause there on that kind of example, and I'm just going to share a couple more slides because I think there's a couple of things in these next few slides that bring that to life as well. I'm very conscious that there are people who think in very mathematical, logical ways, and there are people who are perhaps thinking more in informal, influencing, sort of ripple effect ways. So there's different models that I think just might appeal to different preferences and the way people think. So this really helps some people to see it's actually could be you could look at it in some quite a structured way, and this is a kind of mathematical model about connections and relationships and how that can grow exponentially. Because I think one of the things, to speak to your point, Ken, about where do you start and how, there's a whole load of things you could do. If you're trying to, like I am, trying to influence change at scale across a region of nearly 3 million people, but we've got a tiny team in the grand scheme of that system. So we've got 40 people, which is big for an active partnership, but it's still in a massive region. And so what we have to think about as a team is what's the ways of working that we can engage in that are going to create the conditions for disproportionate amount of influence and ripple effect, or disproportionate exponential potential for change when you've got a tiny resource in a huge system with a huge challenge. And so this learning about the kind of leadership has been really helpful to think about how we create the conditions for that kind of scale of change. That's just a plug for Oldham, really. Pritesh, just wanted to include a little slide for Oldham to because that TEDx talk that Oldham organised was a really interesting thing about the Active Souls, where you kind of making it tangible and visible and concrete into something which had been quite sort of, as I said before, informal and under the radar, really. These slides I use all the time because, again, it's about the key to making change happen at pace, at scale, in a way that isn't about me or any individual or Andy Burnham or any leader in the system being in the centre of it. One of the kind of leadership lessons is about creating the conditions for really strong webs of relationships that are really like flattening of hierarchies and distributed and collective leadership that isn't about one leader or one organisation being at the centre of it. Because what I did feel like in my role in GM Moving, I got to a point probably 3 or 4 years in where I felt like I was becoming the weak link, because my inbox couldn't cope with the demand for this movement to grow. And if everything had to come through me or our team, then it was going to inhibit its growth. So one of the things is about how do you distribute the leadership so that it happens at all those different spatial levels and it isn't reliant on one part of the system or one individual. And you can think about that in lots of, both in the work as a whole, but also in specific areas of the work. So what we're really aiming for is those wide bridges between multiple networks, multiple relationships, strong relationships, collaboration, not being sort of hinging around one part of the system. I know you've used this a lot, Ken, in your work as well. I find it really helpful because, again, it gives you a sense of hope and optimism, and that you can influence change with a small percentage of people in an organisational system if you understand that processes of change isn't about, it can be about a real sort of a spreading and a growing and a contagion effect, rather than it needing to be planned, organised and delivered through formal kind of structures. And that's another leadership thing, is about you need to be able to work both in social networked ways and in formal sort of parts of the system, which we can maybe come back to. I'm going to whistle through these just to kind of whet the appetite, and you can go where you want with them in the chat. But this one speaks to the need for both formal and structured influencing, and also informal and unstructured. So it connects to the slide before, really. And then a big sort of part of it is about thinking, where is their belief and influence or agency, and how do we grow it? So you might have someone who's a huge believer in the power of movement, physical activity, but they might have low agency or influence. So how do you help them to have more influence? Like Rachel, for example, with the Active Souls, she had a massive belief in this, but she would have said she was in a kind of low influence position, but high degree of belief. Actually, what you did by taking the blog into Andy Burnham's office is you gave for more influence, and then look what happened. So there's ways of working that are conducive to sort of moving people from one bit of the, this quadrant to another. And if you've got someone with a huge amount of influence, how do you help them to connect to this mission? So that it becomes their mission, and then they will use their influence for that mission. Beth shared this with me when she looked at the slides that I was putting together, and I thought it was really interesting because it speaks to, again, different preferences and different strengths of people and how we work, because we all work in slightly different ways. So I was going to bring Beth in at this point just to explain about Clifton Strengths and how that connects for you, Beth, to what I've been talking about.
Yep, sure. So as part of Together Ed Active Future, we've been working with partners across the voluntary and the public sector to embed a strengths-based approach through Clifton Strengths. And part of this has been exploring how we influence change. And there's no right or wrong in terms of our kind of leadership style with that. But what Clifton Strengths does is it summarises it into 4 domains, which you can obviously see through that slide. And what's been interesting is that we've almost been getting stuck on the traditional sense of influencing through the orange box in the top right corner around our kind of impact orientated leader. People would see how they can kind of lead change, and if they've not got strong influencing skills, and they almost see that as a bad thing, in the sense of kind of taking charge and speaking up. But actually what's lovely about this is that it shows the way that's authentic to you, and it might be actually that you can influence others through relationship building and being that people orientated leader and kind of building trust and collaboration and working with others. Or you might be more of an evidence-based leader where you rely on data to kind of inform and make better decisions in terms of that influencing and coming at it from that angle. Or the executing is making things happen and getting things done, seeing things through, and actually you influence others by putting words into action. Yeah, I think it's been nice to explore that with partners to show that there isn't one way of influencing, but also what's nice is if there's certain situations that require one of the domains, it's about how can we lean on others who might have more of a propensity to lead in that way, if that makes sense. So yeah, we've invested quite heavily in Clifton Strengths as a rollout for partners across Pennine, Lancashire, and that's, I think this was just a great slide to show the different ways that we can be effective. It doesn't all seem all through kind of the more traditional lens of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's what's lovely about that, is that there's no best way either, is there? There's like we do a lot of work with Colourworks in our organisation, and it helps you to understand people's preferences and when they're in the flow state kind of thing, and what they might have to work harder at, and actually being able to build on someone's strengths. So for me, I'm probably a more people orientated leader. I influence through strong relationships and trust, but that's my preferences. And so that, like you said there, there's other ways of influencing that suit different people's preferences, and in a team or in a leadership team or in a whole system, you need people who play all sorts of different roles within the same thing. So if you take the Active Souls example again, you could sort of plot the key people who have influenced the spread and grow of Active Souls over the years, and they would be influencing in loads of different ways. So there isn't one way, you need all the ways. And that's the great thing about diversity in teams and people. So thanks for that. We might come back to that in a sec. I'm going to skip over that one. We'll share these slides afterwards, but I'm just conscious I want to draw this to a conclusion and kind of then open up for some more questions. I think we did a load of work really early on about what kind of leadership. So an early piece of evaluation work we did in 2018-19 drew out some really common, strong patterns in the kind of mindsets, beliefs, behaviours that were needed to create the conditions for a movement to grow and to take a whole system kind of approach. These have been tested and stress tested for nearly 8 years now, and they still really resonate and a kind of really helpful guide in the sort of how-to of leadership. You can unpick them into some more sort of detail. I won't talk through these, but some more detailed explanations of what they mean. But there are some ways of working that are really helpful to this. And I think this one, you know, some of these things about it's not them and us. It's about collaboration. It's not about competition. It's about learning and being curious and understanding different perspectives is so important. And that bottom one about making something visible. When you spot something that's good, then help it to spread and grow, even if it wasn't yours. I think that speaks really well to the video as well. And then the final one, and we'll perhaps come to the very end, it'll be really helpful in the sort of latter part of this to think about, given all of this conversation we're having, what are you starting to think about? What might we need to be or think about or do differently to play our role in growing a movement? So Ken's going to bring us to perhaps back to some of those questions at the very end. I'm going to pull down my slides and pass back to you, Ken, for a catch up on the chat and maybe a bit of Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Hayley. There's just so much in there. I don't know how everyone else is feeling. It's kind of there's so many things in my mind. I want to just do a bit of a sense check of the room. And I've never done this before, and it might not work. At the top of your screen, you'll see the little react button. And if you click on that button to start with, if you would like to spend the next 20 minutes together in this big room exploring some of that stuff a bit more with Hayley and answering some of the questions that you've put in the chat, if that's your preference, I'm going to ask you to do a thumbs up versus spending some time in breakout rooms together exploring some of that where you get more chance to share your ideas and thoughts. I want you to react with a heart. So thumbs up if you want to stay here, heart if you'd like to spend some more time talking to each other in breakout rooms. And I want you to react now. I'm going to watch the screen and see if that gives us a sense of where we want to be. We could do democracy like this, couldn't we? This could work for government. Okay, we're going to go with staying here. So I'm going to come to it. So just remind you again that if you want to post some questions, there's that onlinequestions.org, and you'll find the details for that in the chat. One of the questions here, Hayley, sort of explores, and you touched on this sense of the formal versus the informal. Like, how much do we need to invest in sort of this, like, project team management, being really mindful about the processes that we apply? Like, have you ever thought about things, for example, about should we be doing some trademarking or copywriting or intellectual property stuff around active souls and trying to, like, is there any, what's this balance between, you think, the organic side of it and just letting it go versus also, I guess, on those two sides, like what sort of structure and process is useful or not here?
Yeah, good question. I'd say that's changing over time as the system conditions around us change. So one of the things that I can't remember when this moment was. There was a conversation I was in a few years ago where we developed an animation that described like integrated health systems work that we were doing in our health sort of NHS guys, and we bit like the animation that I shared. It was a similar kind of thing, but it was around the integrated health systems work. And we developed it with a Greater Manchester voice and a Greater Manchester identity, but realised that it actually wouldn't have costed any more to ask the company that we'd commissioned to do the work to do one that was a sort of took the GM out of it and made it available for anybody in the country to use, because at that moment in time, integrated health systems were coming into being all over the country, and people were craving understanding what that meant and what it meant for their work. And Beth Sutcliffe in our team, I said, well, can we find out how much it would cost to do a non-GM version of it? And basically it was like either nothing or about £5. So we did, and we developed one that was just for anybody to use. And the way I was articulating it then, and I think this is key, is that if we've had investment from Sport England or NHS within Greater Manchester, but that's basically NHS money, and we've developed something tangible that's useful to other people, why would we protect it? Like, it's public money. And that's a privileged position. I recognise it's a privileged position to be in, because we're in an organisation that receives public funding to do good work and to develop stuff. And to be able to set that free and to set active souls free or whatever, and not seek to protect it or take ownership or intellectual property of it or commercialise it, is a privilege that we have. It's public money. And the reason we have that privilege just right now, and this might change, but just right now, is that we are invested in as a system partner for Sport England, and we're invested in as a system partner for Greater Manchester through NHS and Combined Authority. And so my belief is that it's in service of the mission and in service of the movement if we set as much stuff free as possible. Now, that's a liberating position to be in, and is hugely powerful for us in the work. So I've got a board and a set of leaders around Greater Manchester who recognise that if we can create better conditions nationally, even globally, to enable our work to happen, then the neighbourhoods of Greater Manchester would be better off for it. And they recognise that we've got a role to play in influencing nationally as well. So that's, I guess that's where my head goes to with that question. But I also understand that, one, that's how it feels right now. It doesn't mean to say it always will, and it certainly never did before, because we used to be set in competition with each other. And then also recognise that there are some organisations who haven't got the privilege of systemic kind of foundational resource that allows them to give stuff away for free, bluntly. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful to think about it in that way.
Yeah, really thoughtful. And I think, just adding to that, if I can, I think, and there's something as well about, so I agree with all of that. And I think there's something about stuff being open and shareable and using each other's graphics and pictures and videos that helps build the movement. And something that we've talked about before is, in this context of, the people on this call are interested in presumably this idea of sort of systems change in order to tackle some of these big social issues like physical inactivity that we face in our society. But it's that whole thing, like the Sport England Uniting the movement is still fragile, and we need to, just having some good work in Burnley and doing, some colleagues on the call today from Burnley do some great work, right, as they are in Cardiff or wherever it might be across the country. But unless we start to connect all of that together in terms of one total story, we still might not reach the tipping point of changing those cultural norms and ideologies to where physical activity becomes an embedded part of day-to-day life for everybody, which will take redesign of infrastructure and environment and all of those things with it. Chatting with colleagues recently, this tension between, we want this whole systems-based approach and we think our leisure centres can play a key role in connecting communities and outreach and whatever else, but we've got this, but the overarching position will be, but it needs to cost less, and so we're going to scale it down and focus on gym memberships. And so we've still got big dominant worldviews that are not aligned with this idea of a whole systems movement. And so even more importantly then, that we are sharing, connecting, collaborating across all of these different places in order to try and, on a national level, build momentum around doing things differently. That I think is still, we're making progress, but we're still not reached that point where not every person in central government who's holding the purse strings around how we should invest in society is probably all in the same place yet. And so I think that's an important part of that openness, that sharing as well.
Yeah. And the conditions aren't perfect, are they? So we might have better conditions than we had 5-10 years ago, but they're not perfect still. And that sort of, I struggle with the belief that, there's still a sort of a view that we need to make things sustainable. We need to, sort of scale down investment. Actually, we need to scale up investment in prevention and in sort of getting upstream of health system issues, etc. No one's saying, no one's saying kind of we need to there needs to be a day in which we don't invest in the NHS, because that part of the system needs ongoing investment. This work needs ongoing investment. There won't be a day in which we won't need to invest in creating the conditions for active lives. So I think that's where we do collectively sort of, it's helpful when we've got a collective sort of voice around, this doesn't happen by magic. It does need investment, doesn't it? So let's not be, let's not shy away from that. The other thing, sorry, just to go back to your previous question about the structured and the formal and the unstructured, something else that occurred to me is that if you take parkrun as an example of a movement that's growing worldwide, and it's amazing. It's grown through agency and belief, and it has grown also through very formal, structured, organised, quite constrained ways of organising itself, actually. And I know it's been challenged over the years. People constantly say, Andy Burnham said last week, how can they just do something that doesn't start at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning? So that people who don't want to get up early can join in. Actually, it's been very structured and organised, and that's part of that. So it speaks a little bit more, I think, to the Metcalfe's law of that exponential growth in a bit more of a kind of structured way, because it's not everything grows by just osmosis, does it, in a really organic way. So again, it's not an either or, I don't think. I guess what's helpful is to think about what kind of structure, what kind of organisation might help this thing to grow differently. Speaks to like the active souls bit of like, it was growing organically, but actually we're seeing in the way that Manon's working with it in Wales, that if you actually organise it and structure it as well as letting it grow organically, you might have a greater impact, and that disproportionate influence might grow even more. So I just think, we need to sort of check in sometimes and go, are there any ways in which we could grow this differently by being either more or less structured? And yeah, sort of getting that exponential growth through all sorts of mechanisms.
There's something, isn't there, as well, about, I think we did a Scale and Active Future podcast a long time ago now with that was talking about this idea of influencing and storytelling and building momentum, and we touched on this idea of message discipline, and there is, and I didn't really like the word discipline perhaps until you just shared that sense of parkrun, which is like, it is very structured, right? It has to be 5 kilometers, it has to start at 9 o'clock, it has to be volunteer led, you have to use the barcoding system, yet nevertheless it's built massive energy globally. And if you take active, so just to touch on examples we've talked about today, if active souls is a phrase that people got behind, and the hashtag active souls was like a consistent message that people were sharing. If the message was, whatever you want to wear on your feet to work is totally cool and we're all right with it, you get less, it's harder to build momentum around ideas that are not well articulated in a way that people can remember and connect to on an emotional level. And there's all those kind of things around the importance of the message, which I think in some ways, as you touched on with your video, is one of the challenges we've got around like this whole system place-based approach. Like even just that, what does that mean? And that's already too many words that are hard to say one after the other. And actually, I don't even think we've got clarity yet as a system, as a collection of partners interested in this space, around what exactly do we mean by those words, and is it different, like whole systems and place-based, and even that creates some challenges for us as partners to understand, like, what is it that we're trying to do here. So there's something about us getting clearer about our, the government, the narrative, right, and the message discipline, and having something that's memorable and repeatable. And brands are really good at this, right? Like Nike, Just Do It, and all of those, like commercial organizations are really good at this idea of building. And there is a connection, isn't there, between branding and movement building to a degree.
100%. And Nike would never come up with whole systems place-based approach, would they? Like, let's be honest about it. We need to just recognise, and Sarah Brown Fraser and Andrew from Activity Alliance have really helped me to see this in recent years, is about inclusive and accessible language. And you need to talk, in inclusive and accessible ways if you want people to join in. If you're talking whole systems place-based approach and you're in a community centre down the road from here, people have completely gone out. I'm not saying it hasn't got its place, but it's in a more academic, evaluative space, possibly. We need to translate that into what language that people can join in with. A movement for movement is probably as accessible as you can get with it, because at least it generates a sense of it's not just one intervention. It is something that's kind of, it's important not to lose the sense of scale and breadth and ambition around it. And Active Souls, in the blog that unpicks the learning from Active Souls, I get right into this because it was really challenging to think about, is that inclusive and accessible enough? And again, this was Sarah Brown Fraser. What if you're a wheelchair user? What if you're not getting out of your chair and going for a walk at lunchtime? And we played around with different language that tried to make it more accessible and inclusive. And we played around with, is it Active Souls as in Northern Soul, SOUL, instead of SOLE? But that didn't stick. It was sort of, so it's interesting and challenging to make it inclusive as well. It's weird, isn't it? Because it's like you can overthink things, but actually it does matter.
Yeah,
it does matter, because you don't want to exclude.
And the phrase comes to mind that's probably, there's a quote which I'll paraphrase, because something on the lines of, all models are wrong, but some are useful. It's almost like all catchphrases are wrong, but some are potentially useful. Like, none of them can accomplish everything that you might want to say about a topic in one message, but nevertheless can still be useful. So even though it's not fully inclusive of those who are wheeling and moving in different ways, yet nevertheless still has and let's get comfortable with that, because in the pursuit of excellence we can sometimes miss a lot that's good. And so I think that's, sometimes it's better just to start moving, right? But let's just start moving somewhere and see how the momentum builds. I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes left here. So what I'd like to do perhaps is to ask those in the room if you could share any final thoughts. I'm conscious we've not got to everyone's questions, but we'll perhaps.
I was just going to say, just to chip in there, Ken, I've just
please.
had a quick scan of the questions as well, and I'd really happily sort of like write up some responses to those if you send in an email around afterwards, because there's some great questions in there that we haven't had a chance to get into. So I'll commit to that.
No, that'd be great, and I'll happily add to that as well, and others if they want to. So I'm going to come to you in a second, Hayley, just sort of wrap this up in terms of, so what should people do? What are some like tips for action, if you like? So whilst Hayley's sharing some of those tips for action, or what are some of the core key elements of building a system, what should we actually do now? If colleagues on the call will be willing to share the thing that stood out for them during this webinar, that'd be really useful and good feedback, and continue to spur on the thinking. So the ask for you is, what's really stood out? What thought or message or idea has stood out for you today? What have you felt like? And Hayley's going to wrap up with some final sort of key actions. And then at the same time, my colleague Beth is going to share in the chat a link for some feedback and just capture some of the impact and learning from this webinar, just in terms of us trying to continue to get better in the way in which we curate these for you. So what have you been thinking and feeling? Hayley's going to summarize some key sort of actions or tips for practical application, and Beth's going to share, and Beth has shared the feedback form. If you get a minute to do that, that'd be really useful as well. So Hayley, over to you to wrap up, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. It's been helpful space for me to think in preparation and in the session, and takes me back to the first breakout room conversation I had, actually, because there was something in there about that there are movements within movements, aren't there? So there's an organisational movement of culture change within our organisation that enables the organisation to play its part in the movement for movement. And so when you think about your sphere of control or influence, that might be within a really small team, it might be within your community, it might be within your whole organisation, or it might be within the wider system. So being if you're kind of feeling energized around I want to play a role in growing it like a movement, I'm just noticing where there is shared purpose, where is there sort of vision for a new way of being, you know, and that might be in a micro thing like the shoes you wear to work, or it might be in a big scale thing. But I think it's a real opportunity if you can spot something to kind of focus on and then think, well, how do I generate shared purpose around that? How do I generate a collective inspired vision around it? And then how do we get like small incremental wins, changes, might be tangible things, might be ripple effects, but how do you practice as a leader, because we are all leaders in different ways, how do we practice different ways of being, different ways of thinking, letting go of what we might need to let go of, a bit of ego or a bit of intellectual property in the process, but go and experiment and just see what happens, I guess, on a very individual level. To be, how can I be more collaborative? How could I be more work out loud with my work? How could I share things in a way that help people to use them and take them? And that might be tools and assets you're developing. How might you set it free, give it away, help people to connect to it? And then how do you kind of keep that sustained effort over time? So, because it's like you've said, it's almost like there's things that grow energy and really fly, and there's things that die off, and that's fine, but there does need to be an overall sustained effort, you know, going to that sort of bullseye of active lives for all. Let's grow loads and loads of mini movements to kind of take us in that direction, recognizing that some might dissipate and fall away and some might gain energy, and you can't always predict what they are. But I think noticing, and I think it might have been Nikki who just said earlier, you know, how much more in the chat, you know, how much more the language of a movement for movement has grown over the last 10 years across the country. And so instead of going, well, who should we credit with that? It's a different question. It's like, that's a shared endeavor. It's shared credit. We've all played a role in that. So one of the things I absolutely love is when people are shining a light on each other and going like, you know, shine a light on where people are demonstrating the mindsets, the beliefs, the values, the ways of working, the behaviors that are more conducive to growing a movement. Celebrate it, you know, shine a light on it, help it to grow. Because we are all, the way I see it is, we are all across this whole country, one team of people all working on the same thing. So, you know, let go of the ego, let go of the competition, you know, and play your role in changing the culture and the way that we do this work, as well as what the work is. Because I see that every day, and it brings joy, and it's liberating, and it's a much nicer way to work as a human being. So I would just encourage that, and you know, shine a light on each other's great stuff, and that's how it grows.